Today is May 26th, 2026. The four most important words spoken during this entire Iran crisis did not come from a general, were not posted by Donald Trump on Truth Social, and were not delivered through Iranian state television. They appeared quietly during diplomatic exchanges between American officials over Memorial Day weekend before later reaching the press. No dust, no dollars. That phrase now represents the American stance toward the Iran agreement. No disposal of uranium material means no sanctions relief. No transfer of enriched reserves means no release of frozen financial assets. Unless the 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% are physically removed from the tunnel facilities in Isfahan, Iran receives no economic reward from any signed arrangement. Those four words contain an entire strategy. They surfaced during a weekend in which Trump declared negotiations were progressing well. Marco Rubio told reporters in New Delhi that an agreement might be completed that same day. 3 Iranian officials confirmed that a framework already existed. Meanwhile, United States Central Command stated that American forces carried out defensive strikes in southern Iran against missile positions, and Iranian vessels laying naval mines in the Strait of Hormuz, while peace negotiations were still underway. 4 members of the IRGC died in the strait Iran claimed it intended to reopen. On that very day, Rubio stated a deal could be finalized immediately. On that same day, Trump criticized opponents of the negotiations, calling them fools who understood nothing. Iran discussed peace while placing mines in the waterway. America discussed diplomacy while destroying the boats involved. That is the situation on May 26, 2026, and the phrase, no dust, no dollars, explains where events may move next. The developments of the previous 72 hours have unfolded so rapidly that many reports treated each event as isolated. In reality, every development belongs to the same turning point. Trump's demand for 8 simultaneous signatories to the Abraham Accords, Iran potentially joining the Accords in the future. The drone shoot-down over Hormozgan province on the same day the agreement was discussed. The Lucas drone obtaining the HiveMind AI swarm system. Russia launching the Oreshnik toward Kiev. Ukraine striking Russian oil infrastructure at the same time. China moving naval assets near Taiwan Strait. American officials repeating no dust, no dollars as a non-negotiable condition. And then the strikes against Iranian mine-laying boats, while Rubio publicly declared that a deal might be signed within hours. These are not separate stories. They form one single narrative. The Iran conflict has reached a stage where diplomacy and military escalation remain open simultaneously. The coming 48 to 72 hours may determine which path closes first. Every event from the last 3 days provides evidence about which direction the crisis will ultimately take. The mine-laying operation is the most revealing operational development of the ceasefire period, yet it has received little serious analysis. CENTCOM spokesman Captain Tim Hawkins confirmed that American forces launched defensive strikes in southern Iran to protect American personnel from threats posed by Iranian units. The targets included missile launch areas and Iranian boats attempting to deploy naval mines. The strikes happened near Bandar Abbas, home to Iran's principal naval base. Iranian news outlets later identified 4 Revolutionary Guard personnel killed in the attack on the boats. 4 IRGC troops died while placing mines in the Strait of Hormuz during active negotiations, at the exact moment Rubio stated the agreement might be completed that same day. The operational logic behind Iran's actions appears contradictory only at first glance. Iran was mining the same strait it promised to reopen because the mines create leverage during implementation of the agreement. Even if a deal officially reopens the strait, commercial shipping cannot resume safely until the waterway is cleared and verified secure. The strait has been mined throughout the conflict. Clearing those mines requires time, specialized equipment, and verification procedures. The Avenger-class minesweepers repositioned from Japan are part of that effort. The Lamprey unmanned underwater systems mapping the seabed are also involved. Every additional mine placed during the ceasefire extends the timeline before normal maritime traffic can restart. That gives Iran a form of physical leverage over implementation even after an agreement exists. A mined strait cannot reopen according to Washington's timetable. It only reopens according to the pace of mine-clearing operations. Iran appears to be slowing that process by adding more mines during negotiations. American forces striking the boats represented a message from Washington that implementation leverage through mining would not be tolerated. The strikes enforced the spirit of the agreement before the final wording even existed. Now the phrase, no dust, no dollars, deserves full examination because it determines whether this deal becomes a real strategic arrangement or merely a temporary pause. The phrase emerged when American officials began repeating it in reference to nearly 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium that the White House insists must be removed before Iran receives economic benefits. 1,000 pounds equals roughly 450 kilograms enriched to 60% purity. Weapons-grade uranium requires 90% enrichment. Israeli officials described the jump from 60% to 90% as a relatively straightforward technical process. The gap between 0 and 60% is far greater than the gap between 60 and 90. Iran has already completed most of the difficult technical work required for nuclear weapon production. The material already enriched to 60%, approximately 450 kilograms, could support production of 11 nuclear weapons, if refined further to weapons-grade standards. No dust, no dollars means precisely what it states. Before frozen Iranian funds are released, before sanctions relief reaches Iranian financial institutions, before blocked oil revenues are restored, before any economic advantage from the agreement reaches Tehran, the uranium must either leave Iranian control or be destroyed under IAEA verification. That is the American sequencing requirement. Iran receives nothing until the uranium is gone. It is the toughest American position taken in the sequencing dispute that undermined previous negotiations. It also blocks Iran's long-standing strategy of receiving economic relief first, then later, withdrawing from nuclear commitments once its economy stabilizes. No dust, no dollars closes that path entirely. If economic recovery cannot begin before the uranium leaves, Iran cannot rebuild leverage while preserving the stockpile. The blockade pressure continues, the storage crisis remains, payroll issues persist. Internal disputes between the IRGC and the regular military continue as long as the uranium remains inside the country. Economic stabilization cannot shield the uranium if stabilization itself depends on removing it first. That is why these 4 words may be the most consequential phrase of the conflict. They create the sequencing structure that could make the agreement function instead of becoming another temporary pause before Iran rebuilds capacity. Iran's response reveals the contradiction at the center of the current moment. Iran's state-backed media quoted a senior diplomat saying Tehran had made no commitment regarding highly enriched uranium during the preliminary agreement discussions. The United States pushed Iran to transfer the uranium abroad for safekeeping. Iran answered that, at this stage, details regarding nuclear material were not under discussion. Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei stated that negotiations involving uranium could begin only after a memorandum formally ending the war had been accepted. At the same time, regional officials familiar with the framework under discussion indicated that Iran would eventually surrender its stockpile of highly enriched uranium in exchange for Washington ending the blockade and lifting sanctions. Eventually. That single word carries enormous weight. Eventually does not mean now. Eventually is a promise tied to the future. Its timing, conditions, verification process, and enforcement mechanisms all remain undefined. Washington is insisting on no dust, no dollars, meaning the uranium must move before economic relief begins. Tehran is responding that nuclear negotiations will happen eventually, only after a war-ending memorandum is signed, after the blockade is lifted, and after sanctions are removed. These positions cannot be merged into a middle ground. They are opposing answers to the sequencing issue itself. Either the uranium leaves before financial relief begins, or economic benefits arrive before the uranium moves. There is no compromise sequence capable of preserving the strategic logic demanded by both sides. The situation becomes even more complex because Iran is not acting as a single unified actor. Inside the system, at least 2 major factions are operating at the same time, sometimes moving in completely different directions. The civilian diplomatic bloc surrounding Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and the government's negotiating apparatus wants the agreement completed because it understands the math. The blockade is costing $500 million each day. Storage facilities at Karg Island are overflowing. Visible from satellite imagery is a 71-kilometer oil slick. Government workers are not receiving salaries on time. The regular military has experienced armed clashes with the IRGC in 4 cities simultaneously. Since February 28th, 6,500 arrests have taken place. 29 executions have been carried out to suppress internal dissent. The civilian faction looks at those indicators and understands that the blockade's physical reality is moving in only one direction regardless of diplomatic statements. The IRGC hardline faction controlling Mojtaba Khamenei and the physical nuclear infrastructure calculates differently. For them, the uranium is the final bargaining asset. Surrendering it without an absolute guarantee of regime survival would repeat the mistake made by Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi abandoned his weapons programs, cooperated with Western governments, and was later removed and killed when the West determined his survival no longer served its interests. The IRGC hardliners do not intend to repeat that scenario regardless of the economic damage caused by the blockade. They are prepared to let Iran's economy bleed far longer than the civilian faction considers survivable before authorizing surrender of the uranium without a written survival guarantee that no American administration is willing to provide in legally binding form. The mine-laying boats destroyed by American forces represented the hardliner faction's operational vote on whether the United States can be trusted enough to justify the uranium concession. Their actions mirrored exactly what Baghaei stated publicly. The nuclear issue remains unresolved. The uranium has not been committed. And the boats will continue deploying mines until a written guarantee reduces what they see as the Gaddafi risk. Now, the Abraham Accords proposal deserves examination in its full strategic scale because the idea received only brief treatment across most reporting, despite its enormous implications. Trump stated that all these countries should, at minimum, join the Abraham Accords simultaneously. He listed Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Jordan. He also raised the possibility of Iran itself becoming a future participant. Each element carries major significance. The Abraham Accords, created in 2020, normalized relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. Those states already maintained informal cooperation with Israel, and the Accords formalized relationships that effectively already existed. Saudi Arabia is entirely different. Saudi Arabia serves as custodian of Mecca and Medina. It stands as the political and theological center of Sunni Islam. If Riyadh normalizes relations with Israel, it becomes the most consequential diplomatic development in the Middle East since the Egyptian peace agreement of 1979. A Saudi normalization agreement would collapse the diplomatic leverage structure that has prevented Arab-Israeli normalization for generations, because Saudi Arabia provides the political and religious anchor supporting refusal to normalize relations. Once Saudi Arabia moves, every country afterward faces less resistance. Every domestic, religious, and political justification for refusing recognition becomes harder to maintain once the custodians of the two holy mosques change position. The concept of simultaneous signing is intended to solve the first mover problem. No state wants to move first, because doing so creates domestic political risk, without the protection of collective action. If all participants move together, no single government appears to have abandoned the Palestinian issue alone. The political burden becomes collective instead of falling entirely on whichever nation acts first. Trump stated he would accept one or two countries refusing to participate while insisting that most should still join. The structure of that concession matters strategically because the plan does not require unanimous support to achieve transformational impact. If 6 out of 8 nations sign simultaneously, the remaining 2 become isolated exceptions instead of leaders of principled resistance. Then there is Iran as a future member. That part sounds almost unbelievable when stated directly, yet it may be the most strategically advanced piece of the entire proposal. An Iran inside the Abraham Accords framework would mean an Iran formally accepting the regional reality of Israel's existence as part of a broader normalization system. The Islamic Republic's revolutionary identity has long been built around destruction of Israel as a declared objective. Membership in the Abraham Accords would require explicit abandonment of that foundational position in exchange for regional integration and economic normalization. If the agreement ends the war and the Abraham Accords create the regional peace structure, Iran would gain economic incentives to join because participation opens pathways to investment, normalized trade, and diplomatic relationships denied through decades of isolation. Whether the IRGC hardline faction could ever authorize such an identity transformation remains deeply uncertain. But the proposal itself is real. Trump posted it publicly on Truth Social, and it shifts the stakes of the negotiations from a question of uranium surrender to a question of whether Iran becomes part of the regional order instead of remaining the region's spoiler. Trump stated that he discussed the Abraham Accords proposal with regional leaders during negotiations on Saturday. He repeated that 1 or 2 countries declining participation would still be acceptable, provided most joined. Polling analysts report that a majority of the American public wants the war finished. That public sentiment forms the political victory behind the proposal. The central issue is not whether the American president intends to pursue it. The real question is whether the diplomatic structure itself can actually be achieved. Now consider the CENTCOM strikes in their full operational context, because describing them merely as self-defense strikes, while acknowledging they targeted missile launch sites and mine-laying boats during peace negotiations, requires the broader picture. CENTCOM stated that the targets included missile launch positions and Iranian vessels attempting to place naval mines, not only boats. Missile launch sites near Bandar Abbas. That detail matters because throughout the conflict, the American position maintains that Iran's missile and air defense infrastructure had been almost entirely destroyed. Admiral Brad Cooper told the Senate that 90% of Iran's defense industrial base was gone. Now CENTCOM is confirming that missile launch sites near Bandar Abbas remained functional enough to require defensive strikes. That indicates Iran rebuilt at least part of its missile launch capability during the ceasefire period. The systems may have been mobile rather than permanent installations. They may have represented heavily degraded versions of pre-war capability, but they existed, and they were active enough for CENTCOM to strike them. Iranian state television later reported explosions around Bandar Abbas. The Tabnet news website believed to maintain ties to former Revolutionary Guard commander Mohsen Rezaei, identified 4 Revolutionary Guard personnel killed during the American attacks on the boats. The combined strikes against both the boats and missile positions suggest the vessels deploying mines were receiving missile cover from coastal launch systems that American forces considered threats to aircraft or naval units carrying out the interdiction mission. The suppression of enemy air defense portion of the strike package targeting the missile launch systems appears to have been triggered when the IRGC activated those systems in response to the American operation against the mine-laying boats. That operational chain explains why CENTCOM described the attacks as self-defense strikes. Critics argued the strikes appeared offensive, but the first move, the deployment of mine-laying boats, came from the IRGC. The American response, targeting those vessels, was framed as defensive interdiction. The escalation followed when the IRGC activated missile launch systems. That escalation came from Iran. The follow-up strikes against those launch systems were then carried out by CENTCOM as protection against the response triggered by the original defensive interception. 4 IRGC personnel were killed in a chain of action and reaction that began with Iranian mine operations inside a Strait Iran simultaneously promised to reopen. On Truth Social, Donald Trump stated that negotiations were progressing smoothly on the very same evening those strikes happened. That contradiction is itself a message. American forces are hitting Iranian targets, Iranian personnel are dying, and at the same time, Washington is still pursuing a diplomatic agreement. The military track remains active. The diplomatic track remains active. Both are operating simultaneously. That is what one way or the other looks like before a final outcome is reached. Now the domestic political dimension inside the United States is also unfolding alongside the military and diplomatic developments, creating direct pressure on both the timing and final shape of the agreement. Senior Republican figures warned that the emerging arrangement could become a catastrophic mistake. Those voices included Mike Pompeo, Roger Wicker, Lindsey Graham, and Ted Cruz. All publicly demanded harsher conditions or renewed military pressure. Trump responded by labeling critics as Democrats, rhinos, and fools who understand nothing about the possible agreement. That response reveals 2 things. First, Trump appears determined to complete the agreement regardless of criticism coming from Republican senators. He is not reshaping the framework to satisfy opponents. He is dismissing them publicly. Second, the phrase "know nothing about the potential deal" suggests Trump believes the classified agreement text differs substantially from the interpretation critics are reacting to. Those critics are responding primarily to descriptions coming from Iranian state media and filtered through Western reporting rather than the classified document itself. Trump may believe that if opponents could actually read the agreement, including whatever legally binding form the no dust, no dollars condition takes, the argument that the deal is a disaster would collapse. But critics cannot see the text. Until the document becomes public, the political debate continues using incomplete information that reflects Iranian framing more heavily because Iran has been the more aggressive source of leaked details surrounding negotiations. Polling analysts report that most Americans want the war ended, regardless of the specific deal terms. That political reality strengthens Trump's position and weakens the critics politically, even if their strategic concerns remain substantial. Now the wider global environment matters, because the Iran negotiations are unfolding while every other major theater remains active. Russia launched the Oreshnik hypersonic nuclear-capable missile toward the Kyiv region 2 days earlier, while simultaneously deploying 600 drones in the largest single-night assault on the Ukrainian capital in 4 years of war. 4 people were killed. More than 83 were injured. Damage occurred across 40 separate locations. The Oreshnik travels at 10 times the speed of sound. Ukraine currently possesses no system capable of intercepting it. That same night, Ukraine struck the Taman oil terminal in Russia's Krasnodar region, attacked Russian warships at the Novorossiysk naval base, and hit ammunition storage and military infrastructure throughout multiple occupied territories. Russian casualties since February 2022 have reached roughly 1,355,000. Russia's spring offensive failed to capture any major Ukrainian city during 2026. According to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Russia is losing between 30,000 and 40,000 troops each month without territorial progress, and is actually losing ground overall as Ukraine regains territory in net terms. Russia ordered foreign diplomats to evacuate Kyiv, while warning it would target Ukrainian defense industry sites inside the capital. NATO and Ukrainian defenders interpreted the threat not as literal destruction of a European capital, but as preparation for another massive missile and drone assault. At the same time, China is testing Taiwan's outer defense perimeter using Coast Guard vessels inside restricted waters near the Pratas Islands, while conducting major PLA Navy deployments throughout the South China Sea and Western Pacific, in coordination with Balakatan 2026 exercises involving the Philippines. As recently as 48 hours ago, 100 Chinese military ships were operating inside the first island chain. 3 simultaneous crises, 3 theaters, 1 American strategic capacity. If the Iran agreement creates a genuine nuclear constraint, that capacity is freed for other theaters. If the agreement becomes only a temporary pause before Iran rebuilds capability, American strategic capacity remains permanently fragmented. Now consider the military posture that remains fully active regardless of whether diplomacy succeeds or fails. The force structure was not reduced during the ceasefire and remained active during the self-defense strikes that killed 4 IRGC personnel last night. B-1B Lancers remain stationed at RAF Fairford equipped with hypersonic external pylons never before used in combat. Delta Force operators have remained positioned across the Middle East since March specifically for the Isfahan uranium retrieval option. The WC-135RNR, Constant Phoenix nuclear atmospheric detection aircraft, is deployed at Al Udeid Air Base monitoring the Isfahan region. The Washington Post reported that the Pentagon briefed Trump on a proposal involving construction of a runway inside Iranian territory so cargo aircraft could physically remove the uranium. Trump stated on full measure that he would secure the uranium one way or another and destroy anyone attempting to reach it first. The Lucas drone, a $35,000 American counterpart to Iran's Shahed 136, was reverse engineered and rebuilt with American components by Spectre Works in Arizona. It has now received the Shield AI HiveMind autonomy software upgrade. That upgrade transforms individual Lucas drones into a coordinated swarm capable of sharing targeting information in real time and collectively adapting to air defense responses. A HiveMind-equipped Lucas swarm striking radar installations on islands surrounding the Strait of Hormuz would target Iran's ability to monitor and threaten maritime traffic at the information collection level, effectively blinding Iranian awareness in the strait rather than simply slowing operations. And Marco Rubio stated that the issue would be resolved one way or the other. One path is the agreement. No dust, no dollars. Then uranium removal. Then sanctions relief. Then the Abraham Accords framework reshaping the regional order. The other path is the existing military posture at RAF Fairford, the Delta Force teams already waiting in the region, the WC-135R monitoring the Isfahan atmosphere, and the HiveMind Lucas swarms capable of reaching every radar installation in the strait. Here's the complete reality on May 26, 2026. American forces struck Iranian mine-laying vessels and missile launch sites in southern Iran last night, killing 4 IRGC personnel during active peace negotiations, while Trump posted that talks were progressing smoothly. At the same time, Rubio declared a deal could be signed that very day. American officials were insisting on no dust, no dollars as the non-negotiable sequencing formula, meaning the uranium must physically leave Iran before Tehran receives any economic benefit. A senior Iranian diplomat stated that Iran has made no nuclear commitment within the initial agreement. Iran's foreign ministry stated that nuclear details are not yet under discussion. Iranian vessels were laying mines in the strait Iran promised to reopen while those statements were being delivered. Trump demanded simultaneous Abraham Accords participation from 8 countries and suggested Iran could eventually become part of the framework. Senate Republicans called the arrangement a disaster. Trump answered by calling them fools who understood nothing. Russia launched the Oreshnik toward Kiev. Ukraine hit Russian oil terminals. China moved ships near Taiwan. And the Lucas drone received a new AI system that makes the military option far more precise than it was 3 months earlier. All of it is happening at the same time, on May 26th, 2026. Either the agreement is completed today in the form required by no dust, no dollars, meaning a binding uranium commitment with uranium first and economic second, or the agreement is not completed in that form. And if it is not completed in that form, then the other way Rubio described begins moving from language into operational reality. No dust, no dollars. 4 IRGC personnel paid for Iran's mine-laying operation with their lives last night. The B-2 remains within range. Delta Force remains positioned. The WC-135R continues watching Isfahan. And the question of whether diplomacy or force provides the final answer is now the only question that matters on May 26, 2026. If you want more deep military and geopolitical breakdowns delivered in this format, stay connected for the next update because the next 72 hours may decide which path closes first. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.